Stephen in Washington has a question about church power and belief in God. So welcome, Stephen.
Hey, Matt and Arden. I was just speaking to you yesterday.
Hey, Stephen.
You'd mentioned about potentially starting my own call-in show, and I went down to Target this morning with my daughter. She told me which headset to get, and she set up a Twitch account for me. So
hell yeah, that's awesome. Way to go.
So the topic that I wanted to talk to you all about. So you always ask, what do you believe and why? I oddly enough, I'm more nervous talking about this than any other time that I've called in, but I am an Episcopalian. I believe in God and his son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit, and that I have a relationship with that God. I believe that truth is determined through communal determinations, and that every person has their own truth, and that then communicating to you is a way for you to arrive at your own truth. Like, atheists might not be 100% correct, but their perspective is key to understanding God as a whole.
Well, I'm going to jump in for a second, and then I'm going to let Arden and go on with this, because I absolutely, unequivocally, repeatedly reject the notion that each person has their own individual truth. Each person may have their own opinions about what is or isn't true, but truth doesn't give a shit for anybody's opinions. Something is either true or it's not, independent of what any person thinks.
Yeah, I would love to ask you, Stephen, like, I hear this kind of concept of like my truth a lot, and I'm totally going to straight up steal this from like Anthony Magdabosco, right? But if I have like a jar of gumballs in my hand, and like it's either even or it's odd, right? There's no like, if you say, well, it's odd and that's my truth, that doesn't mean anything. Like there's a truth to how many gumballs are in that jar, correct?
Sure. And so if you're looking at, using your example, if you're looking at a gumball jar, there's a number of different ways that you could arrive at the correct answer of how many gumballs are in fact in that jar. Measurement would be probably the most precise, but I think that when we're talking about issues of like the best way to live one's life, that communal determinations between various disparate belief groups and just individuals throughout the world, that's the best way to come to an answer on those types of questions.
Well, I don't know that it necessarily is, because I think there's like, we can learn facts of the matter about what kind of things are good for. I mean, you're saying communal truths, and I'm not even entirely sure what that means, but if I were to assume, like, it kind of sounds like you're saying, oh, like in a community of believers, like their truth is what's good for them, and that might be like a belief in God or something. But if what's actually helping them is like demonstrably like the community aspect, that's not the belief in God that's helpful there, you know? So can you maybe it would be helpful if you explained to me what you mean by what was the term you used?
Communal. Yeah, I'd love an example of what you think is a communal truth and how you can tell that it's true.
Okay. So community is a really big deal, especially in my church specifically, but the Episcopalian church as a whole focuses on building community. Not that other churches don't, but it's something that we kind of centralize around. And as far as like what a communal truth would look like, I would say like, so something, here's actually a really good example. I have been struggling with choosing a career path for a long time now, and I've landed in a position that I am like at my core happy with what I'm doing. And you know, I took perspectives from everybody around me, everybody in my community, And each of them had something they believed was true about me and about what I should do with my life. And I took each of those truths and learned from them to arrive at what ended up being the best answer for me.
Yeah, I wouldn't call what you're talking about there truth. Like if you were to say, I was trying to figure out what career path would be best for me, and I asked the people in my life who I value what their perspective on my ideas was. That's not asking for like their truth. That's asking for their perspective on a specific issue regarding, taking into account things they know about you. To me, that's not a truth. That's like an opinion or a suggestion or a recommendation. This definition of truth feels very loose and shaky.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that, because what you just described was you asked a bunch of people what they thought about you, and you took their truths, which did any of them disagree in their assessment of you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which means that some of them might have been correct, and the ones that disagreed are wrong. And maybe none of them were correct. But also you asserted that after taking all this on board, you made a career path that you're happy with. But you also said that it was the best answer for you. But you don't know that. You have no clue whether or not this is the best answer or the right answer. You might just be rationalizing that, well, these are the people who convinced me, so I'm going to be happy with this. Absolutely nothing you have described in any way demonstrates truth. You have no idea if those people told you what they actually believe. You have no idea if their views about you were accurate or not. You have no way of telling who's correct and who's not. You have no way of saying that because these people told you this, it didn't actually influence your decision or your happiness about it. It's all self-reported. This is all just incredibly fuzzy thinking that has nothing to do with truth.
Sure. I understand. I understand what you're saying. I mean, a core piece of this community I'm talking about is I know all of these people. If they, departed from what has consistently been their perspective about me and about what would be best for my well-being, that would be kind of a red flag for me that they weren't being truthful.
Why isn't it a red flag? Why isn't it a red flag that you don't care whether or not it's true? You just want their opinions of you to be consistent. Yeah, that's a red flag. You're not talking about truth.
I don't think, like, if they gave you an answer like that was like super off the mark, you're like, well, that's not like based on things I know about you and recommendations you give me in the past and our relationship together. That doesn't sound like a normal answer that you would give me. Like, to me, that's not like them being a truth. That could be a red flag of like a million different things going on. Maybe they're having a psychological break. Maybe they are being dishonest with you, or maybe you're like not understanding what they're saying. There could be a number of things going on there, but it's not like they're sharing a mistruth or their truth, or they're not being truthful. You're just talking about people's opinions about who you care about what's going on in your life. I don't think that has anything to do with a personal truth.
I don't, maybe I'm not communicating this well. Like, there are definitive facts about me and about what, people observe about my life. Those things are true. I don't know how that doesn't correlate to.
Okay, but if in fact there are facts about your life, how do you know what those facts are? And how do you know when somebody tells you what they think of you, whether or not it's consistent with the facts? Because if you're going to say that it's true because it's consistent with the facts, I agree with you. Truth is that which is consistent with the facts, but it has nothing to do with anybody's opinion.
I mean, if we're talking about a lifetime of events that have happened over someone being alive, people have different perspectives on those things, and I feel like each of them is valuable to arriving at
I agree, but that doesn't mean any of them are true. We're asking you, how do you tell which ones are true? I have a bunch of people around me, and they all have opinions about me, and some of those opinions might be true, and some of those opinions aren't true. I'm asking for how you find out what's true. And if you say, well, you look at the facts, I agree, but that's not what you talked about. I want to know what a communal truth is. How on earth can a community have a truth How do you demonstrate what's true? Popularity?
Look, Stephen, I love you. I think you're great. I do think maybe it'll be worth like taking some time off and thinking about some of the questions we were asking you and how they make you feel and where you land and stuff. I do think it's really important though to like when we're talking about definitions about things that are really big like this, or concepts that are really big rather, definitions are really important. So like I think hashing out what we mean when we say truth is huge. And for what it sounds like from what you're describing is that you're, in my opinion, from my definition understanding of how these words are defined, you're conflating truth with opinion. Um like I asked my stepdad for advice recently on some career paths and stuff, and he told me exactly what he thought, but I don't think he was sharing with me his truth. I think he was sharing me his opinions. If he sat down with me and said, listed the factual accomplishments I've made, that could be, I guess, sharing truth with me, but it wouldn't be sharing his truth. It's just the truth. So yeah, I think it sounds like we're doing a lot of definitions around, or a lot of dancing around definitions, and it might be worth taking some time to iron out exactly what you mean when you say these things.
Yeah, because we're all in agreement. Somebody can have an opinion about a fact, and their opinion can be true, or it might not be true. The whole point is to figure out, how do we tell what the truth is? And so in your communal truth, is it just, what is your measure for figuring out if somebody tells you something, how is it true or not?
So I might have a resolution to this, and I think I know where we're getting off step here. So if someone was to describe Matt, if someone was to describe your personality as like strong and independent, or outspoken, or very loyal, any of those characteristics, would you say that them saying that is stating something that is true about you?
No, I would say that I either agree or disagree with that. Those are opinion assessments. And if there were facts to demonstrate that those were the case, then I'm happy to accept the facts. But if somebody just says, oh, Matt's an asshole, well, that could be true depending on how we defined asshole. I'm perfectly willing to accept that. But them saying it is completely irrelevant to whether or not it's true. It's true independent of whether anybody says it or not. And if somebody says, Matt, you're being an asshole, I can say, and I agree with you. But that's about what I agree with.
Right.
I'm asking about truth.
That comes back to the whole concept of the gumballs in the jar, is that like you may say like, oh, I don't know, 52, and you may be right, or you may just be like taking a wild guess, but there is an actual truth of the matter there. And like I know we talk about trans rights a lot because you've called into my show multiple times. Like when we're talking about like gender identity, while yeah, language and how we describe it and how we communicate it and what it means to be a woman to an individual in like the social sense might vary greatly. I wouldn't call that a personal truth. Those are opinions. There's a fact of the matter about your gender. You either are trans or you are not. So I think it's really important to understand that when we're talking about like the truth of the matter, we're talking about like something that comports with reality, like an actual fact about reality. That's where truth is. And when you're talking
Which
about
by
like
the
how
way,
someone feels about you, that's not the same thing.
yeah, which by the way, you may have a different definition of truth, and we're just never, ever going to agree. But for me, the facts determine what the truth is, not opinions. And it may be like, so if, let's say, for example, Stephen, that your opinion of me is that I'm too brusque. It's a fact that that's your opinion of me, and I will accept that it's a fact that that's your opinion of me. I would probably even accept that or say that I agree with you. But when we're talking about whether or not there's a fact, and I want to get past this because the communal truth thing that you described, I can't make any sense of it all. But I also don't know how it's relevant to whether or not there's a God. And you're convinced that you have a personal relationship with a God. There's not a single person who I have a personal relationship with that I cannot introduce you to. I don't know what it means
Sure.
to have a personal relationship with someone that it's in the ballpark of, oh, you wouldn't know them, they go to another school. If you have a personal relationship with somebody, how could it possibly be the case that you can't demonstrate that?
So this actually gets more onto the actual topic that I initially was going to call about, or initially called about. I believe in that I'm justified in that belief because of the power that is in the church.
What power?
The power that the church has within my community makes it so that I think I'm justified in believing in it.
But does that, if you're talking about the power of your community, like the power of them to support you and help you make decisions or accomplish goals or something, that doesn't demonstrate that Jesus exists or that God exists. That just demonstrates that community is really important for humans and that we really need groups of people, and that generally, if you're not like a billionaire, you're probably someone who could use a little help from the people around you. That doesn't demonstrate that a God exists. That just demonstrates that humans are helpful to other humans sometimes.
Yeah, I really want to know what you mean by the power of the church.
So I guess what I'm saying is it's worth it for me to believe because when I'm in the church, it gives a lot of benefits to me, to my community. It's the main thoroughfare through and donate food to people, that we provide housing to people.
Stephen, you literally just described you believe it because there's a benefit to believing it, which is separate from whether or not it's true. Of course, there's a benefit to being in the most popular group on the planet. Of course, there's a benefit when you move to a new area. Hey, here's a church ready-made for you and a whole community, and we'll help each other out. And here's some people who are going to make meals for you. All of that is absolutely true. There's massive, massive benefits to believing, even though there's no reason to think it's actually true. But you said that you had a personal relationship with God, which is in a completely different category from whether or not it's practically useful to believe there's a God. What's this personal relationship?
I can't be in the church unless I have that relationship.
No, sir, that's not true. No, that's absolutely not true. There's plenty of people. So first of all, the Bible points out that there's people in the church who are not believers. There are many who, that's right in there. We recognize that from long before either of us were born. But I've been to church and I've been a member of a church, and I don't think that was true. I thought I had a relationship, but I did not have a relationship. The only thing that's required for you to be a member of a church is for you to pretend or to actually be convinced that you have a relationship with God. There is no requirement and there cannot be a requirement that you actually have a relationship with God. How do you demonstrate that you do?
What I mean is that I can't in good conscience be a member of my church and just not believe the things that church believes.
Yeah.
Stephen,
So
Stephen, you're skipping past the question. I'm not saying you just described you can't be a member of that church if you don't accept it. Fine. You told us you had a personal relationship with God. How do you prove that?
Okay. So when I say that I have a personal relationship with God, when I am communicating with God, Jesus, it's very similar to how people describe meditation. And I know that you said you had those feelings before and that it's perfectly explainable through other means that have nothing to do with Jesus. But that stimulus plus the necessity of belief, if I'm honestly going to participate in that church, leads me to just accept it because of because partially of the benefits, because it's always been a part of my life.
I didn't ask
None of
Stephen.
this is
Stephen, stop.
It's just
I'm not questioning whether or not you believe. I'm not questioning your sincerity. I'm asking what reason you have to say that you have a relationship with God. How could you demonstrate that to anyone else? You can't even demonstrate it to yourself. And the descriptions you gave are like, oh, it's similar to how people describe meditation. Well, that has nothing to do with whether or not there is in fact a God that you're communicating with. I'm not saying that you don't believe it. I believe that you believe it. I'm asking, why are you convinced? And how could you demonstrate to anyone else that you have a relationship with a God?
okay. So if you're looking for like physical hard evidence for to demonstrate at least what that my belief and how to correlate that to a physical state of my brain, you could probably stick my ass in an MRI and I'll pray and it'll show a certain pattern, and that's God to me.
Well, Stephen, that's not God. That's an MRI result that shows what your brain is doing. You are now grossly rational. Go ahead, Arden. I'm sorry.
That's just like, I mean, kind of like your point, you're comparing it to meditation. Like meditation is a completely physiological thing that's happening. You're inducing a brain state. You know, if you're telling me that when you pray to Jesus, you induce some sort of brain state to you that makes you feel good, I totally believe you. The question is whether or not there's a God involved, and you're claiming there is. So we're asking how. How do you know that? How do you know it's not just a brain state? What happens that makes it qualitatively different from just having a physiological brain state?
Maybe this will help. Is it possible that someone could be convinced they have a personal relationship with a God and be wrong about it?
Absolutely.
So here's two people. One person is, they're both convinced they have a relationship with God. One of them does and one of them doesn't. How do we tell the difference?
I don't know.
I don't either, but you're the one who's claiming that you do know, because you've made a decision when you just acknowledge that you don't have a method to reach that conclusion. That's the point. I can't tell the difference. I don't know how anybody can tell the difference, but you are claiming to be able to tell the difference because you're convinced that you are one of those people, the one that actually has a relationship with God. Do you see the problem? I'm not saying you're wrong about whether you have a relationship with God. I'm saying you are convinced you do, while simultaneously acknowledging that you don't have any way to tell whether or not you do.
That's fair. But
Stephen, I'm going to jump in here really quick because I feel like maybe this conversation is a little overwhelming for you. I don't know if you've watched the show before or if you like knew what you were getting yourself into. I think we've been on this call for a while too, so we probably should move on to some other calls. But
well, yeah, I want to give him a chance to finish, guys. I don't want to just leave. I realize that is a sticking point that's difficult for people, and
yeah,
I have no problem with Stephen. I have no problem with Stephen. Stephen's been honest and getting to acknowledge this. It's a weird position to find out, hey, I'm convinced that I'm in one of these two categories while also being convinced I can't tell the difference between those categories. I just wanted to make sure it makes sense. I don't want to beat up on Stephen. That's not the goal.
No, and I don't feel like I'm being beat up on. It's
good.
I think the problem is that if I actually accept that I don't believe it, that I won't be able to be part of my church anymore, and that it changes a lot about my life, and I guess I'm just kind of afraid of what that means.
Yeah, well, Stephen,
but that,
can I just interject really quickly,
guys?
I just want to point out that it may well be that if you find out you don't believe and that you publicly declare that in some fashion, which you aren't obligated to do, but if you do, it may well be that your church community doesn't want you around. But doesn't that speak to that maybe this community isn't as closely knit or really as good of a community as you think it is? If they're willing to kick you out or deny support from you where they otherwise would have, let go of relationships that they've built with you because you aren't convinced of a proposition that they also are probably not able to justify or explain in any kind of way. Doesn't that make those relationships seem kind of like phony in some sense? That it's like, as long as you're all, it's like if you were in like this Marvel fan club and you're all like, everyone here says Iron Man is the best superhero, but the second you say, well, Iron Man's cool, but I think I might like another one, and they're all like, yeah, get the fuck out. Like that shows you your community is kind of shitty. Like,
to be fair, I think it's a great point, but I also realize that we're all going to draw our lines somewhere. Sure. And like the Atheist Community of Austin isn't going to allow members who don't identify as atheists, but it doesn't mean we're going to cut people off just because they disagree on something. But yeah, I'm sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that they would cut me off or anything. It's just I don't know if I could interact with them the way that I do now, knowing that I would have to lie to them in order for them to see me the way that they do now. And I don't know how they I don't know what would change if I didn't believe anymore. And that's definitely something that I'm going to have to kind of digest for a little while, but I'll let you guys get on to other calls, and you've given me a lot to think about, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate it. And also, I know this is a tough spot to be in because when you start to realize, Dan Dennett wrote a book where he talked about the difference between believing in something and believing in belief. And I think all of us would recognize there's a huge advantage to being in the popular kids group. And right now we live in a world where Christianity of some stripe is the popular kids group, like 30% or so worldwide. But definitely. I will say that's 30% versus all the other categories. If you stack it up against, there's like 70% of the world that don't fit into there. And who knows what people are, where people are going to go. But I appreciate your answers and your honesty and how difficult this is. So keep thinking. And if you change your mind, great. And if you don't, great. But you're doing more than most people I interact with, which is you're actually thinking about it and you're willing to answer things that are difficult. So absolutely. I appreciate that greatly.
Thank you for calling, Stephen. I always appreciate Stephen so greatly. Very honest interlocutor, definitely cares about the well-being of people around him.
Yep.
And I think that's more than you can say for a lot of the theists that we engage with on this sort of platform. We get a lot of people who are, kind of hateful people, have some bigotry associated with their beliefs. And I will say Stephen is absolutely not one of those people. And I wish him the best.